picture this. You're sitting in a chair, maybe you're on a train or just in your living room, staring at a window.
Right.
And you are doing absolutely nothing. No phone in your hand, no book in your lap. There's no conversation happening around you at all.
It's just total silence.
Exactly. You're not trying to solve a problem or, focus on any specific goal. You are just zoning out.
Yeah.
And intuitively, you probably feel like your brain has just powered down.
Yeah.
Like a laptop going into sleep mode.
Yeah.
The screen goes black, the internal fan stops whirring, and you just assume your neural machinery is finally taking a well-deserved break from the chaos of the day.
It's a comforting thought. I mean, it really is. But the reality inside your skull is entirely different.
Which is so wild.
Yeah, because when you think you are doing nothing, your brain is actually firing up this incredibly complex, highly demanding architecture. I mean, it doesn't power down at all. It redirects its power.
Which, honestly, it completely shatters everything we assume about rest.
Oh, absolutely.
So today, we are taking a deep dive into an article from SpiralSeekr titled DMN, the Default Mode Network. And for anyone who wants to understand the actual biological machinery behind what we casually call our ego, this source is just a goldmine.
It really is. It's fascinating.
It takes all these abstract philosophical concepts about the self and anchors them in hard empirical neurobiology. So, okay, let's unpack this. The article mentions a few specific physical zones in the brain that light up when we stare out that window. But it uses some pretty heavy neuroanatomy terms.
Right, yeah.
What exactly is this physical real estate we're talking about?
So the overarching structure here is called the Default Mode Network, or the DMN.
The DMNs.
Right. And it's basically a highly interconnected grid of cortical nodes. From a strict neurobiological standpoint, this network activates specifically in the absence of external goal-directed stimuli.
Meaning when you're not trying to do a specific task.
Exactly. When your attention drops away from the outside world, the DMN turns on and it directs your attention entirely inward. Yep. Yeah, and the source highlights three major hubs in this grid. You've got the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, and the angular gyrus.
Okay, those sound like, discrete, isolated parts of an engine or something. What are they actually doing when they synchronize and light up together?
Well, broadly speaking, they are constantly generating and maintaining the illusion of you.
The illusion of me.
Yeah, your sense of self. Let's break down their functions to see how that actually works. So, the posterior cingulate cortex is heavily involved in autobiographical memory.
Okay.
Think of it as the archivist. It holds the continuous story of what happened to you yesterday or, 10 years ago. It keeps that narrative straight.
Right, right.
Meanwhile, the medial prefrontal cortex, that handles what the source calls temporal simulation.
Temporal simulation. So wait, like running hypothetical scenarios.
Exactly.
Like when you're in the shower and you're replaying an argument you had earlier, but this time you're coming up with the perfect witty comeback.
Oh, definitely. Or, worrying about a presentation you have to give tomorrow morning. Yes, it's essentially time travel.
Time travel, wow.
You are projecting your sense of self into the past or the future. And finally, you have the angular gyrus. And this region helps integrate sensory information so you can actually make sense of events.
Oh, I see.
So when you are sitting there staring out that window, you aren't a blank slate at all. You are ruminating, you're anticipating, and you're evaluating.
Right.
The DMN basically takes the archived past and the simulated future, and it weaves them together to create this continuous, unbroken narrative of who you are right now. In short, this network is the anatomical seat of the ego.
That is just... I was trying to visualize how much effort that takes, right? And the best analogy I could come up with is like a background app on your smartphone.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. You slip your phone into your pocket, the screen goes dark, and you think it's resting.
Yeah.
But there's this one heavy application running silently in the background, constantly pinging GPS towers, downloading massive amounts of data, curating your personalized feed.
Yeah.
You never actually see it, but it is highly metabolically expensive. It's draining your battery just to maintain this curated story of your life.
That's spot on. And the metabolic cost is actually staggering. I mean, the brain consumes about 20% of the body's total energy, and a massive chunk of that goes directly to fueling the DMN.
Wait, really? Just the DMN?
Just running this background app? Yeah. It requires tremendous caloric energy. And the thing is, its role isn't just passive storytelling. It actually serves as an overarching conductor for the rest of the brain.
Conductor.
Yeah, it acts as a top-down cognitive filter.
Meaning it actively suppresses other things from happening.
Yes. It suppresses what the article refers to as entropic static.
Entropic static.
Right. Think of the brain as this chaotic storm of billions of neurons firing all at once, processing endless streams of raw sensory data, random associations, all of that.
Okay.
If you were consciously aware of all of it, you'd be completely paralyzed by noise. So the DMN comes in and forces all that chaotic activity into a cohesive linear narrative.
Ah, yes.
It dictates what information fits the story of you, and it just discards the rest.
So it's heavily editing reality just to keep the story straight.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is that this metabolically expensive, rigid, heavy-handed filtering network is actually evolutionarily essential.
Because it keeps us alive.
Yeah. You absolutely need a cohesive narrative of self to survive as an organism.
Right, because if you don't remember that a specific type of snake bit you yesterday, or if you lack the temporal simulation to realize winter is coming and you need to gather firewood, I mean, you die.
Exactly. Not only that, but consider social cohesion. Human beings are tribal social animals, right? To navigate complex hierarchies and alliances, you need a stable, predictable identity.
That makes total sense.
You need an ego so that other egos in your tribe know how to interact with you, how to trust you, and how to predict your behavior. The DMN provides that stable identity by acting as a very strict, uncompromising filter on your reality.
Okay, but let me push back on that for a second.
Sure.
Because if this filter is so perfectly evolved to keep us alive and functioning in society, why does it backfire so disastrously in people who suffer from chronic mental health struggles?
That's the big question.
Right. The source points out that this network is highly rigid. It seems like the ultimate double-edged sword. When the continuous narrative it enforces turns negative, it stops being a helpful filter and turns into a prison.
You're touching on the critical flaw in the architecture right there, because the DMN's primary evolutionary mandate is to enforce a continuous narrative at all costs.
Even if it hurts you.
Right. It will fight to maintain that narrative, even if the story is incredibly destructive to the host. The article actually zeroes in on chronic psychiatric distress, specifically conditions like major depressive disorder and obsessive-compulsive disorder.
Oh, wow. Oh, okay.
In these states, fMRI scans reveal that the DMN doesn't just operate as usual, it becomes intensely hyperactive.
Hyperactive. So the conductor isn't just guiding the orchestra anymore. It's holding them hostage and demanding they play the exact same miserable, dissonant chord on a loop.
And loop is the operative word here. The text states that the ego narrative structurally loops. This is where the biology becomes really profound.
How so?
Well, depression or severe OCD, it isn't just a bad mood or a lack of willpower. The physical neural pathways literally get locked into immutable patterns of rumination and rigid behavioral archetypes.
Wow.
The brain builds a physical rut, and the hyperactive DMN continually drives the individual's thoughts right back into that rut.
Think about what that actually feels like for a second, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everyone listening has experienced getting stuck in a thought loop, worrying about a mistake at work, obsessing over a breakup. It's exhausting.
It's completely draining.
But for someone with a hyperactive DMN, the neurobiology literally locks the doors. I mean, the source uses the phrase trapped in a self-constructed software environment.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
The filter that evolved to help them survive the winter is now suffocating them by actively suppressing any positive entropic static, any new perspective or hope, because it just doesn't fit the established narrative of despair.
It creates a closed circuit. That's why simply telling someone with chronic depression to just snap out of it or choose joy is fundamentally detached from the biology.
Right, doesn't work like that.
No, because you are asking them to run new software while the operating system itself is locked in a hyperactive loop. It's actively rejecting new commands. The brain has lost its flexibility.
So it's a hardware problem.
Exactly. To fix it, you can't just talk to the software. You have to interrupt the hardware.
But how do you actually force a system like that to reboot? If the overarching conductor absolutely refuses to step down, how do you override the operating system? Because, well, here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, it really does. Because we enter the realm of the pharmacological override.
Okay.
The source delves into the specific interaction between the DMN and classical psychedelics like psilocybin and LSD, as well as certain dissociatives like ketamine.
Now wait, we're looking at hard empirical data for this, right?
Mm.
Not just subjective trip reports from people.
Oh, absolutely. We are looking directly at functional magnetic resonance imaging. Under the influence of these specific compounds, the fMRI scans capture something remarkable.
Which is?
They acutely decouple the synchronized hubs of the DMN.
Decouple, so they disconnect.
Right. Those regions we talked about earlier, the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, they literally stop talking to each other in that rigid, synchronized way. The compound effectively takes the ego-protecting network offline.
Wow. I was trying to picture what this decoupling looks like in practice. Yeah. Imagine a massive corporate office building, right? The DMN is the incredibly strict office manager on the top floor. They dictate exactly who can talk to who, what memos are allowed to be passed around, and they force everyone to stick rigidly to the company line.
He sounds awful.
Right. But suddenly, someone slips a chemical compound into the water cooler, and that strict office manager simply leaves the building. Instantly, all the cubicle walls drop.
I love that visual.
Departments that have never been allowed to speak to each other, like accounting and creative, human resources and IT, suddenly start throwing a massive, chaotic brainstorming session.
That is exactly it. And it's a chaotic brainstorming session that the source formally defines as a high entropy state.
High entropy.
Yeah. Now, entropy usually implies disorder, but in neurobiology, this specific type of disorder is profoundly generative. With the strict top-down filter of the DMN completely removed, global brain connectivity just explodes.
Wow.
Regions of the cortex that are traditionally heavily insulated from one another, they begin to freely and intensely communicate.
So the entropic static that the DMN usually suppresses is suddenly allowed to just flood the entire system.
Yes.
The raw data of reality isn't being edited anymore.
Not at all. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this neurological high entropy state, this massive explosion of crosstalk between normally insulated brain regions, this is the exact physical mechanism behind what individuals subjectively report as ego dissolution.
Ego dissolution.
Or a feeling of mystical unity.
Because the biological hardware that maintains the border between you and everything else has been temporarily shut down.
Exactly.
You literally lose the machinery that generates the feeling of a separate, isolated self.
The individual stops experiencing the world through the heavy, metabolically expensive filter of their autobiographical memory or, their anxieties about tomorrow.
Right.
They are processing pure sensory and emotional data without the overarching conductor constantly stepping in to say, hey, here is what this means about you. The narrative just stops.
Which sounds incredibly freeing. But honestly, it leads to the most pragmatic question of this entire deep dive.
What's that?
Well, the article explicitly calls this disruption an ephemeral window. Ephemeral meaning temporary.
Right.
The drug eventually metabolizes, the trip ends, the strict office manager comes back to the top floor, and the DMN recouples.
It does.
So, if it's just a temporary vacation from your ego, how does a 6-hour experience actually cure a 10-year chronic software loop like major depression?
That's a great question. Because the acute experience of ego dissolution is really only the first phase.
Okay.
The lasting therapeutic benefit actually comes from what happens in the aftermath. The source outlines a process of recalibration.
Recalibration?
Yeah. Suppressing the DMN with these compounds is the physiological equivalent of executing a hard reset on a frozen computer terminal.
So you pull the plug, let the RAM completely clear out, and then you boot it back up.
Exactly. And when the brain boots back up after this acute disruption, it enters a brief, highly sensitive phase of hyperplasticity.
Plasticity, like the brain's ability to wire new connections.
Yes. Neuroplasticity is the brain physically changing its structure and adapting.
Makes me think of like fresh snowfall.
Oh, how so?
Well, before the disruption, the person was stuck in deep, icy behavioral ruts, the structural loops of depression we talked about.
Right.
But the compound lays down a thick layer of fresh snow.
That's a beautiful way to phrase it. It grants the individual a profound temporary window where they are unencumbered by their entrenched behavioral patterns.
So they aren't forced down the same path.
Exactly. The historical trauma that usually dictates their immediate subconscious reactions doesn't have the same iron grip. During this hyperplastic window, the brain has the actual physical opportunity to forge novel synaptic pathways.
They can finally walk a new path through the snow before the ice sets in again.
That is the mechanical therapeutic value right there. And it bridges a gap that has existed for centuries between philosophy and biology.
Oh, absolutely.
By mapping the abstract concept of the ego to specific observable neural correlates, We actually ground the mind in empirical anatomy.
And the practical implication of that just blew me away. There's a specific line in the text that summarizes this shift beautifully. It says, "We are not bound to our patterns by metaphysical fate, but by neurochemical inertia."
It's a powerful statement.
It really is. Think about how heavy the concept of metaphysical fate is. It implies you are cursed.
Right.
It suggests that your trauma, your OCD, or your depression is like a permanent stain on your soul, some core failing of who you are.
But neurochemical inertia completely strips away that moral weight.
Yes.
Because inertia is just physics. It's a biological habit, a heavy object in motion staying in motion.
Right.
And as the source emphasizes, because this inertia is physical, it possesses known override protocols. We are developing the pharmacological tools to physically interrupt that inertia, collapse the rigid architecture of the DMN, and give the system a fighting chance to recalibrate.
It completely reframes mental health.
It does.
It stops being about spiritual deficits or a lack of willpower, and it just becomes a mechanical issue of structural looping in a metabolically expensive network, a network that occasionally just desperately needs a hard reset.
Precisely.
So what does this all mean? Think about the arc of what we've uncovered here today. We started with the realization that sitting quietly and doing nothing is an illusion. Your resting brain is actually burning massive amounts of energy running the DMN, aggressively filtering reality to keep the story of you coherent.
Right.
Then we saw how that exact same evolutionary survival mechanism can turn on you, trapping you in a hyperactive software prison of rumination.
Yeah.
And finally, we explored the radical frontier of science, using profound pharmacological tools to temporarily turn that ego network off, drop the cubicle walls, and create a highly plastic window for the brain to literally heal itself.
The philosophical ramifications of this empirical science are just unavoidable. We are forced to reckon with the realization that the ego, the continuous, unbroken I that you identify as, is not a permanent ethereal soul. It is a highly malleable, metabolically expensive biological simulation.
Wow.
It is a tool designed entirely for evolutionary fitness. And because it is a biological tool, it can be suppressed, decoupled, and structurally rewritten.
It's just software running on meat hardware,
Yeah,
which is both terrifying and incredibly liberating at the same time.
it really is. And it leads directly to the profound final thought presented by the source material. This raises an important question.
Okay, lay it on us.
If our fundamental concept of self is largely a biological simulation maintained by specific cortical nodes, and if that simulation can be entirely suppressed or temporarily powered down by a chemical compound, then who or what remains to observe the process when the network goes offline?
Wow. If the DMN is decoupled, the narrative is paused, and the ego is completely gone. But there is still a subjective, vivid experience of mystical unity being recorded and remembered. Who is doing the experiencing?
The source leaves us with this exact provocation to consider. Are you the software? Are you the hardware? Or are you simply the electricity pulsing between the nodes?
Are you the software, the hardware, or the electricity? That is going to fundamentally change how I look out a window from now on.
Me too.
Well, we want to warmly thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you some incredible insights into the biological architecture of who you think you are and armed you with a new way to think about the struggles of the mind. Keep questioning your reality, keep exploring the source material, and the next time you find yourself zoning out, staring blankly at the wall, just remember your brain is burning immense amounts of energy, desperately working overtime to remind you exactly who is looking through the glass. Until next time.